The other thing we wanted to do is answer 4 questions that were raised on one of the last videos. And that was, you're trying to get at the truth, but there's very little that's really actually true in the world or provably true in the world. 2 is, people will ruin it because either they're going to be overly emotionally driven to do things that are not true, or they're going to be self-interested, or they're just going to sabotage the system because they can. And even if they don't, their judgment would make things too subjective, such that it would become kind of a jury trial. And we know that those don't have a high rate of accuracy. And so I will attempt to address those things with some slides here. One is that I'm not trying to address things upon which we genuinely disagree. I'm trying to address those things that we genuinely agree on for the most part, like 80% of the time, but we think we disagree because of the way the communication is happening. So I don't believe it's the content of our arguments that divide us. I think the method which normalizes our arguments, the variables of our discussion, that's what's missing. So when we agree, like if we disagree, we can agree that we disagree. I can agree with something, you can disagree with something, and then we disagree. I agree there's going to be a lot of things like that, but I think the majority of what I'm talking about, which I think is hugely emotionally charged for no reason, is where we actually do fundamentally agree, but we think we disagree, and so we take issue with each other. We just had this play out on Facebook yesterday, and we played out the whole scenario without a program, and it worked. We got to the meat of the argument, added evidence, and actually were able to diffuse what was an emotionally charged situation. So the first thing, there's little true in the world. We have opportunities to use computational confidence factors to systemically establish correlations to discern with a high rate of accuracy what has fidelity, what has evidence associated with it. There's a white paper on it in this link. And so if we're using that kind of approach for purposes of the system, what I'm saying is that a statement made in the system with attached evidence verified by a third party starts to feel like the truth. And then as long as everybody is aggregating statements that support that path, it becomes a higher degree of confidence in terms of being true. So no thing is absolutely true or false, but if it's in play, by definition, there's a question about its validity. And so it needs to be completed. It needs to be verified to whatever degree, using incidents weighing in against it or for it, to be able to ultimately reach an 80% maturity level. So the example that I gave about me being nurturing, true, I'm not 100% nurturing. If you really piss me off, I may not react in a nurturing fashion. But if you were to aggregate instances from reputable sources about instances of that behavior, I think it would inform me in where it is that I'm not necessarily being as nurturing as I would hope to be. And that would allow me to improve and keep score on those things. And I think that would fill a lot of voids for people, because I think we genuinely over or underestimate the reality of our own existence. And so having feedback mechanisms to reinforce what's true can only add to our sense of self. The second thing was that people will ruin it. If you have an open platform, people will ruin it. So let's turn that into how do we, through an open and secure platform, create a managed access machine learning capability where we can protect from these people factors. And there's ways to do this, because we used to worry about people adding bad content to our knowledge bases, and we found ways to do that with review cycles and metrics so that people would start to assimilate into the right way to do things. We know some people will try to kill it. Everybody tries to kill something. So no, somebody always tries to kill everything. Let's put it that way. There are examples of highly accurate social open systems, like say Wikipedia, which has 80% accuracy, and others that have higher rate of accuracy. And we know there's people behind the curtain managing all of this. It's not all automated, and there's going to be some corruption in the system. But our definition of who's going to be the users of the system is through by invitation. And so they will be qualified and referred. And so we don't expect massive viral adoption. We expect it to become kind of a pull chain of people coming into it on a VPN. And we want to put it on a private network. And we were worried about it being on a biased platform because people are getting censored. A lot of people I like to listen to, like Chris Hedges, have been censored on YouTube. So we needed an open platform with open source technology that could not be shut off if it were found to be controversial. And Elon Musk just bought Twitter. He's going to make open IPI. He's got his own satellite service so you can connect to communications without requiring cellular communications. And so I believe that at least gives us a home to put this system where we don't have to worry about that level of vulnerability. And then the idea that everything it becomes a judgment anyway if there isn't hard evidence, and so that's like putting everything on a jury trial. But in a jury trial, it's groupthink, and what we're talking about is crowdsourcing. They're very different dynamics, even though they both involve groups of people. So in this situation, there'd be no right or wrong. There'd be no innocent and guilty plea. We would just be gathering every piece of evidence along the path of the storyline to what is true. Each juror independently, in this scenario, would be correlating evidence to the body of evidence in terms of the relevance to supporting the storyline. So that, for example, we know that the DNA evidence would weigh in more heavily than, say, the hearsay evidence about the glove fitting in the OJ trial. They knew that that whole glove fitting situation was just for show, but they couldn't dismiss it. And in this case, instead of groupthink, we would have crowdsourcing where people could privately put in their input to the evidence, and then it could be weighed out, and then the evidence relative to each other with its significance to the story that we're trying to support would be given a relatively high weight. So there is no shadow of doubt hokey pokey going on. It's all accumulated systemically and objectively. The other one was you can't use information to address emotional issues. That was the other concern. But we're saying that using object-oriented models to determine the level of alignment and agreement takes the emotion out of those things that are being triggered emotionally but don't innately include emotional content. So for example, if you start with should we have abortion or not, that's so tied to an emotional content. That would not be where we would start. We would start with, although we could make significant progress, I'm sure, on that. We could start with things that are emotionally triggered, but are in fact not really emotionally, like are electric vehicles more costly to the environment than fossil fuel? This was another Facebook example where somebody posted something hardly emotionally charged, but really it's a factually based argument, which could be made by accruing the impact of electronic vehicles on the environment, assessing the cost of the resources and impacts, projecting the cost of electric vehicles after reaching maturity, not in the inception phase where we are, and then doing projected costs and comparing to other options in the environment. And using statements to determine what aligns and what story is really starting to unravel about electric vehicles, it takes all the emotional charge right out of it. So even though Facebook is doing a good job of fact checking, taking some of that emotion out of it, it doesn't follow through on then maybe making those accountable who put out these emotionally charged content to trigger emotional responses. So those are to address each of the specific arguments. And ironically enough, we've been having them play out manually. I don't know how the timing worked out, but I see that it is possible. It is not highly technically new ground. And I think we should take advantage of it for people instead of just for corporations. So thank you.